in the book, yes, probably at greater risk, but to meet that deadline. But if instead your constraint is just power play, you're doing no one any favours. In particular, in most cases, when work starts on site is irrelevant to you. It doesn't matter at all. What matters to you is when the keys are handed over, when you move in. If you allow us to take the time up front and get everything set up properly, the project will run much smoother. You'll have it done for the same deadline, but without the headaches. So let us take control of your programme. But then, we like a realistic brief. Yes, we like a good, challenging brief. Of course we do. If things are straightforward and simple, yeah, well and good. If you give us a real tricky challenge, then that's when the juices really get flowing. If you want us to turn a derelict castle into a luxury hotel with every room en suite and no obvious place to put them, yep, we'll handle it. If you want every apartment to have a sea view, and yet you want more accommodation than you can get in a linear block along the seafront, yeah, we'll handle it. So if it's challenging that you want, yes, that's what we specialise in. But there's challenging and there's impossible. We were recently bidding for a public tender. I've carefully removed any names from this to not incriminate the parties. For fire protection works for a nameless university. The brief was vague on what was required. We'll survey the buildings, build on existing information, design improvements to bring these properties to compliance standard. In other words, we don't yet know what's needed. They estimate that it's probably around £1.5 million worth of works. The one thing, however, that they are very specific about, they want to be completed on site before the end of 2015. Now, this was just a few weeks ago, so about 3 months. Now, just to note, we need to survey the buildings, we need to fully design proposals, we need to get full statutory consents, noting that these are prominent A-listed buildings. We need to tender the works through the traditional procurement process that they had specified, and then the works need to be carried out on site in an operating building in 3 months. They didn't seem terribly impressed when at the interview we used the word challenging to describe their programme, or when we talked about the need to prioritise and maybe consider compromise. We don't expect an inexperienced client to know what is realistic. This, however, was an experienced States Department. But we do expect you to listen to honest professional advice. But one thing that maybe putting it here seems a bit more dangerous, a good brief is probably an evolving brief. A brief is rarely a single document produced right at the beginning of the project that never changes. It's generally something that evolves, something that develops as the project progresses. You've probably all seen a graph something like this, that essentially says, as time goes on through the project, it gets more and more difficult to make changes and the cost of them goes up and up. Yes, absolutely. There is, however, a reasonable period at the beginning where the cost isn't that significant. You're probably talking about losing a little bit of time, maybe paying a little bit more design fees, hopefully. But like everything else, design fees at the beginning of the project are nothing compared to the construction costs at the end. Even the RIBA plan of work, which is it looks at construction projects in a very linear sort of fashion. Recognises that there are at least 3 stages of the brief. They start off with what they call stage 0, the strategic definition, with the strategic brief, which they describe as the brief prepared to enable the strategic definition of the project. Then, stage 1, they go on to the initial project brief. The brief prepared following discussions with the client to ascertain the project objectives. So that's really what we've been largely talking about, where you tell us what it is that you're needing. But then, in stage 2, they have what they describe as the final project brief, which is the initial project brief amended so that it is aligned with the concept design. So you've had that initial brief. Working from that, the concept design has evolved, and now you're happy with the concept design, and you redefine the brief to say, yes, that's what we want. In reality, most projects don't necessarily work quite in a 3-stage thing like that. It tends to be more of a iterative process, as with every step, you get closer and closer to the final optimum outcome. Often the initial attempts are way off. We had one recently where we thought we understood the client's brief for basically a traditional country house. They came into the office, they looked at the first plan we showed them, and their immediate reaction is, no one uses dining rooms. I don't want a dining room. Why did you give me a dining room? Because no one uses them. They're just depressing. Okay, fair enough. We now had a better understanding of their brief. We then came back with the next iteration, which was a considerably more radical, spaces flowing into each other, fairly modern open plan sort of space. They looked at that, and to be honest, I think they thought it was quite fun. I think they liked the idea, but it wasn't what they actually wanted for their house to live in. And so then the next iteration, which we're working on just now, having tried there, we'll try somewhere in between, trying to define the rooms a bit more, but making sure that it's not stuffy and old-fashioned, allowing more flow but still a bit more enclosure. And so with each step, you get closer and closer to the final outcome, until eventually you end up with something that everyone is happy, yes, that's the perfect project. Ideally, you have that pretty much settled by the end of the concept design stage. Certainly, ideally, you have that settled by the planning stage. But there will always be small revisions as the project goes on. That's reality. We'll deal with it. But if in some cases circumstances change, your brief changes while the project's on site, yes, it's a nightmare. Yes, it's not what anyone would aim for, but let us know. Be honest with us. We'll see what we can work out for you. There will probably be some delays. There will almost certainly be abortive cost involved. But if it ends up with you getting the building that you really need, yes, we can do it. For instance, going back to John O'Groats, the whole brief for the internal layout was completely changed once the building was on site. We completely redesigned the interior while we were building the shell. And that's for a building that isn't an office block with curtain walling that will take pretty much any accommodation behind, but a building that has windows placed in fairly specific positions over it. Drainage pop-ups already in the slab. Structure all in place. Yes, we can do it. It'll cost you, but if it gets you the building you want, fine. But then ultimately, getting all that technical stuff out of the way, what we want is an exciting brief. If you want us to really get our teeth into the project, give us a brief that we can be excited by, but more importantly, give us a brief that you are excited by. If we can see that you passionately care about this project, we'll feed off that. We'll care about it. We'll give you something that you really want. We were involved in another public tender a few years ago for an outdoor activity centre. Yeah, we were excited by the project. Great site. Our office is full of people that thrive in the great outdoors, probably Ian in particular. It was a job that we'd love to do. When we turned up for the interview, we realised that the panel consisted of people that had absolutely no attachment to the project. It was a room full of suits that were purely there to make sure the procurement process was gone through properly. There was no one there that we could excite about our vision for the project, because they weren't excited about the project. But if you are excited, let us know your dream. Let us catch your vision. Whether the project is big or whether the project is small, whether it's complex or simple, if you're excited about it, we'll be excited about it too. So just want to finish by quickly rattling through a few images, fairly randomly selected, that I could find easily on my computer, but just of some projects, some built, some unbuilt, where there was something about the brief that excited us. This was a project extending a house in a converted farmsteading. The bedrooms in it were very poor compared with the rest of the accommodation. But it was a client that wanted something really good. They wanted drama in their house. And so we were able to give them that. We were able to give them windows from the bathroom that looked directly onto the pond. We were able to give them high ceiling heights in some areas and more intimate space.